Hey everyone, this lesson is just for clarinet players. So if you're not a clarinet player, this video is not for you. Watch something else. Clarinet players, we're here to talk today about playing notes in the upper register for the clarinet. The way the clarinet works in general, and you've probably noticed this, is the more fingers we have down, the lower the notes, and the fewer fingers we have down, the more holes that are open, the higher the notes. That G I just played isn't all of the holes open. I can open a few more holes till I'm playing a high B flat, which is the highest note we've learned so far. There's a whole set of notes that are higher still, and the whole pattern starts over with holes that are all the way closed, and then opening more and more holes will get higher and higher. The upper register sounds like this. And the same pattern is the more holes I open, the higher the instrument gets until I get all the holes open. So here is how we get to play those high notes. All you have to do to get to an upper register is to open a vent somewhere in the instrument. And the vent that we usually have to open on the clarinet is called the register key. Get closer to the camera. Now we've used a thumb hole a whole ton. We've used this thumb key here, the register key, only when we play high B flat, which is the register key plus the A key held down together. When we get into the upper register, what we'll have to do is we'll be holding down the thumb key, the thumb hole as we normally would, and just the tip of our thumb is going to pivot just enough to open the register key without opening the thumb hole. And we will end up using the exact same fingers that we needed to do to play the low notes to skip up to those high notes. So watch this. I'm going to play a low A on my clarinet. And then I'll pivot my thumb just enough to open that hole and listen to what happens with that low A. I didn't change anything here. I just made sure that I had my regular embouchure and I kept that fast air moving, and all that had to move was the tip of my thumb. If we were in the classroom, what I would do to teach this lesson is I would play one of those low notes and I'd have a student sneak up next to me while my eyes were closed and just push this button just for a moment. Even if I'm not aware that hole's opening, the high notes happen. Now, we've actually learned this principle already in class because I taught you early on that leaks make squeaks. So a lot of you got some squeaks that came out early in the year that were actually you accidentally playing upper register notes because you were making a leak somewhere in the top part of the clarinet that caused it to skip up to the higher register on your clarinet, which made that squeaky sound. Now we're creating a leak on purpose, not to have squeaks, but so that we can play those notes in the upper register. Just the same fingers we learned before, but with that vent open to create the higher notes. Let's take a look at how that looks in the book. All right, so here's the first page in the book where we get to start working on notes that are in the upper register. You'll notice here in the yellow box that we have the fingerings for three notes, E, F, and G. You also should notice that these fingerings are all familiar to us, or should be familiar to us. The fingering for E looks exactly like the fingering for low A. The fingering for F looks exactly like the fingering for low B flat. The fingering for G looks exactly like the fingering for low C, except for the register key, which we can see here, here, and here, is highlighted in black, so we know that we have to press down the register key for each of these. The trick, of course, is being able to hold down the thumb key and the register key at the same time so that we don't open up the thumb key by mistake. Now, the technique I showed you earlier, I'm going to hold my thumb over that key, and just the tip of my thumb is going to pivot while the soft part, the pad of my thumb, is still sealing the hole all the way shut. Line 98 is the first line where we get to play these high notes. And the composers of our book were clever. They intentionally made sure that notes with the same fingerings work together and you just get to pivot your thumb. So let's practice the thumb pivot first. I'd like you to try this with me. Play a low A and skip up to a high E. Remember, they both have the same fingering, and all that will happen is the tip of my thumb moves. Low A to high E. Now try that as a slur, just keep the air moving. Try again. Now, if you get something like this, there's a couple of possibilities. You're changing the amount of air you're using, you're just blowing too hard, or you have too much mouthpiece in your mouth, or you might have a leak somewhere else. Make sure that you've got the right embouchure, the right setup for that low note. Notice not a whole ton of mouthpiece in my mouth. And just the thumb moves. It's key that you have that intense stream of air on both the high and the low notes, but don't all of a sudden try and blow harder for the high note. It's not going to work. Try the same thing with B flat and F. Try the same thing then with C and G. Now, once you can do each of those skips by themselves, you're ready to put the whole line together. At least the first 3/4 of the line together. The best way to practice this might be to practice it just in chunks first before you put all the things together. We'll deal with this chunk last. Now, I want to point out to you, and I'm not sure that I understand exactly why the composers made the choice to write it this way. The key signature for most of it is the key of C major. There's no flats and no sharps. Then it changes to F major in the middle. So that means here we have to watch out for B flats, obviously, because if we played a B natural here, we wouldn't get a high F, we'd get something else. Everywhere else, the composer wants us to play B naturals. So here's all of the first 3/4 of line 98. You can play along with me. You might need to go super slow and chunk it out in yourself first. Notice that there's fermatas, so I'm going to hold those for a while. You'll be able to see me breathe and know it's time to go to the next one. Here we go, line 98. 1, 2, 3. Go back, rewind, rewatch, play through that with me, making sure that you make those pivots without a break in between because they're slurred, keeping the air fast and intense the whole time. Don't try and loosen your embouchure or try and blow extra hard for the high note. That's the recipe for getting a squeak. Now, when we do this in class for the first time in person, usually what happens is everyone goes, oh, this line is easy because I know all the fingerings, which you do. The fingerings for the high notes in this case are exactly the same as the low notes. They get to this part here and they realize that it's harder than they thought because now they actually have to remember the fingerings for the high notes. So take a minute, study, think, name these notes. I can look here and then look here. Okay, that's an E. Here to here. Oh, that's an F. Here to here. That's a G. And you can practice naming them. I'll give you a minute to think about that. So you see, I've written the note names there. Most of this we're moving by step, E to F to G. It gets tricky here when we have to skip from E to G and G to E at the end. Now, I don't want you to practice reading off letters. Let's get rid of those letters that are on the screen. And here's the last four bars of the tune. And the composers of the book wrote it this way on purpose so that it is slurred, so you're keeping the air moving between them. If you're huffing and puffing or stopping the air, besides it not being very musical, it's really hard to articulate the new notes at this point without getting squeaks or unpleasant sounds. In fact, we should always be striving to keep the air moving using slurring air while we use our tongue if we are tonguing. In this case, just using slurring air because we're slurring. Here's the whole line. 1, 2, 3. That's it, guys. This is going to be something you're going to want to work on and practice. In our book going forward, then, the authors are going to scaffold this a little bit, and you'll see songs that have, like line 99, where part of the song is high notes and part of the song is low notes, and we go back and forth occasionally between those two registers. The big jump we'll have to make is in a few pages where we have to go back and forth frequently between high and low notes, especially the highest low notes and the lowest high notes. But this should give you something to work on for now. As always, thanks for stopping by.